Hello, everybody, and welcome to another discussion with a theist here on the Atheist Reformation channel. Joining me once again is Elijah. How you doing, Elijah?
Doing well. How you doing, Thomas?
I am doing fantastic. I'm glad to have you back on, and this time where everybody can see your lovely face and the
Thank you.
the workings of the facial hair. You got a little ways to go, but you're on your way, so you're doing good.
I just shaved a couple days ago. I had like a whole mess.
Oh man, you should have kept that.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Don't you know you're not an expert on the internet without weirdly growing, overgrown facial hair?
Hey, the Eastern Orthodox would agree with you there.
Yeah, they probably would.
Yeah.
But anyways, so last time Elijah was on with us, we discussed miracles and a few in particular. Today we're going kind of a different route. Since Peter, who talked to us about creationism last time, elected not to come back on the show to continue the discussion, Elijah here has graciously decided to take up the discussion from a different standpoint, from the Catholic standpoint, instead of the IFB standpoint. So some things will change. There will definitely be some viewpoint differences between the two worldviews as far as that goes. To what extent will they differ? We'll find out tonight.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Thomas. Again,
Mm-hmm.
now I didn't watch the show on evolution that you guys had and creationism, so I really don't know what was said. But I would imagine there probably is more similarities than differences between the sides. But we can get into that um, later on.
Oh, sure. Long story short was that Peter approached with the tack that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, created in 7 actual 24-hour days, that dinosaurs did live with human beings at one point, and that every single thing on Earth was specially created and did not evolve. So that was, for lack of any more nuanced take on it, that's about as far as we got in our discussion.
Makes sense.
Um, there were a couple of attempts to kind of go down rabbit trails talking about abiogenesis, which I know you probably won't do, since I'll go ahead and address it now, since I think we've kind of had a little bit of a preliminary discussion here and there through our talks in the past, that evolution doesn't actually attempt to answer the question of how life started, just how life comes from other life, and that's pretty much it.
Sure.
As has become tradition with how I run this show, we're going to let you discuss and espouse upon your position regarding this topic as to what you understand it to be, what you see it as, what problems you may or may not see with it, and kind of go from there and just kind of let the discussion form as it flows.
Sure. I appreciate it, Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't personally hold to the theory of evolution, as I think I've told you before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now I'm open to it, but I just so we'll take the first category here, which I don't know if you'd be much help on this. No offense, but it's a theological category, right? So I don't see how it can be reconciled with Christianity, the way we
Okay.
understand Christianity. So I'll give you an example. So
Sure.
this is a question that I always have for theistic evolutionists, like
Mm-hmm.
Catholics that hold to that view, or some Protestants or Christians in general, right? So the question is that I have is, if evolution is true, how does that play into the idea of original sin, right? So the idea of original sin is we have Adam and Eve who fell, and because of their fall, death entered the world. Now,
Okay.
that would presuppose that humans have already been here. With evolution, humans are the last ones to evolve as of right now, right?
Well, it's not that we're the last ones to evolve. Everything is still constantly evolving.
Sure,
Even we are undergoing changes. Uh,
absolutely. That's what I mean. I mean, like, as of right now, we are the last one. That doesn't mean there's not going to be any more afterwards. But what I mean is, we are the final, not the final product. What's the word I'm looking for? Um, you know what I'm saying. There's going to be more if evolution is true, evolving from humans, but
Right. So I think what you're probably looking for, and that's one of the more common things that people say, is that we are the quote unquote most evolved.
there you go. Most people.
And that's a perfect thing to kind of bring us into our first point,
Sure.
is that that's actually not a thing. There is
Okay.
no more or less evolved. Something is either better suited to its environment or it is not. For instance, we would not refer to a shark as being more or less evolved than a human,
Mm,
but we can both come to the agreement that it is much better suited for its environment than
sure.
ours.
Fair enough.
It's like I think it's attributed to Albert Einstein, but
Sure.
and it is that you can't judge a fish by its ability to jump or climb a tree for fear that it will live its entire life feeling it is stupid. Just like you wouldn't measure a person who is best suited for doing things like mathematics for their ability to read or compose poetry, that kind of thing.
Sure. Fair enough. Fair enough. So, moving along is the theologically speaking, if sin caused death to enter the world, then how can we reconcile evolution? Now, obviously, evolution is a theory that Catholicism says we can hold to. Catholics are freely free to choose to believe in evolution.
Right, it's been endorsed by the Holy See, if I remember correctly.
Sure, sure.
And was that under Benedict or was that under Francis that endorsed it?
No, I mean, I think there's an encyclical by Pope Pius XII going back to the 50s that's kind of that touched on it, and that's what most people reference to say that. So it was
Okay.
even pre-Vatican II that
Okay.
it was. Now there's some people that would argue that interpretation. I'm not going to be the one to do that. I don't know how they can, but I'd be open-minded to understanding how that's possible. It would favor my position that the Catholic Church doesn't endorse it. But moving along, philosophically speaking, the issues I have, and this is probably something that you would be able to maybe address on the show, is how can something give what it doesn't have philosophically, right? So if I don't have something, it doesn't matter how many years, how many billions of years, I can't give that to another species, or I can't evolve into another species. Like for example, an eyeball, right? If I
Okay.
don't have eyes, I can't give eyes to myself. As
No,
far
you
as
can't. You can't necessarily give them to yourself, but we have actually tracked the evolution of the eye back to even primitive, what would be kind of called like proto eyes at
sure,
the ends of I think either sea cucumbers or starfish, if I remember correctly.
sure. Now, I do believe that evolution happens, right? But
Okay.
and I'm sure you've heard this a gazillion times, and it probably annoys the crap out of you. But I do believe in microevolution, not so much macro. So I believe that dogs can evolve into other different types of dogs, and cats, and can do the same thing, and horses,
Okay.
things of that.
So yes, that does kind of annoy me,
I figured it
and
did.
it's more because for lack of a better term, it just illustrates a lack of understanding in the topic,
Sure.
and that's fine. People can lack understanding because
Right.
it's not something they specialize in or they don't talk about it all the time, and that's fine. It's okay
Right.
to lack understanding,
Sure.
and that's another reason why I like having this particular show. So it's to increase understanding and allow people to kind of engage on that level. So,
Sure.
just a moment, gotta change something.
No worries.
Sorry about that. Had to wet the whistle a little bit.
No worries.
Didn't want to hear everybody hear me glugging into the microphone.
No
That
worries.
would be gross. But anyway,
Yeah. So,
so
I do have questions on evolution. I mean, I can talk about my stance,
okay.
but I prefer to ask you questions because I'd like to hear your stance on it. Because
Okay.
you're probably going to be the one that knows more on the topic than I do. So if you can touch on, my first question is, how do you define science and how do
Hmm.
you define evolution, and what is evolution? And if you don't mind first talking about that before we can
Yeah,
get into
sure.
it.
Okay, so evolution, as in as simple a terms as I can explain it. So I'm not going to get into like the scientific rabbit holes of it. Evolution is simply the uh, best comprised is the theory that best explains all currently available data regarding biodiversity on this planet. How life came from other life, how life changed over time, all of that. It's kind of all encompassing. A couple things that evolution does not touch on is how life started.
Mhm.
There are multiple working hypotheses for that, such as panspermia, the first DNA or RNA got here on some kind of a rock floating in space, meteorite, that kind of thing. Which, for how life starts, just kind of kicks the can further on down the road. And so, for some people, that creates a bit of a philosophical conundrum, and they don't really like it. Um, Others would be um, the working hypothesis of abiogenesis. We've actually had some headway in that with things such as the Miller-Urey experiment. They were actually able to, through essentially a series of lightning strikes in what geologically we can best determine as what you could argue as primordial soup, so to speak. I don't like that term. It's not really an accurate one, but it's understandable and relatable to the greatest number of people, so that's why I choose to use it here.
Sure.
And it created RNA. And if you have RNA, you will get DNA because RNA makes DNA. And as long as you have those two things, you have the replicator and then you have the transcriptor. So everything from there on out can then flow. So it seems to be one of the best possible explanations.
Mhm.
Is it the only one that's out there? No. Is it still
Mhm.
being explored? Yes. So it has not yet reached the level of theory, but it is making some serious headway.
What do you mean by that? It hasn't reached the level of theory. What are
Well,
the levels?
so theory is the highest level something can reach in science.
Mhm.
A theory is a scientific theory. It's not how we understand how we understand it colloquially, which a theory is, oh, I think this about that.
Sure.
And so loosely that's what we kind of use as a definition for theory colloquially in our everyday lives. However, a scientific theory is the best explanation given all available data.
Sure.
So you use things like scientific laws, which are not really laws in and of themselves. They are observations that we have made about reality. These things that seem to remain constant. They're not required to remain constant, but they remain constant enough in the framework that we look at it
Right.
to to offer some level of explanatory power. That's another mark of a theory, is it has to provide explanatory power. What can it predict that something is going to happen? For instance, something that evolution in and of itself, or at least the theory of it, predicted was where we would find the fossilized remains of Tiktaalik. This happened back in about 2005. This is effectively a fish or amphibian with a lot of either amphibian or fish characteristics.
Sure.
And so one of the big marks of it was that the way its fin structure was, it actually had digits in its fin like we do our hands and fingers. And so there was, based on what we could determine from its fossilized remains, was that it quite possibly was plantigrade, meaning it could walk on its fins.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, evidence in what we observe can be interpreted in different ways, right? So someone who believes in evolution would look at that and say, you know, obviously this is evidence for evolution.
Well, not so much
Someone,
that it's evidence for evolution, it's that evolution predicted where we would find it. and we found it where it was predicted. So not only is that fossilized, though those fossilized remains evidence of evolution, but it is also indicative of the explanatory power of the theory. And that makes it even more robust than just having that fish available or having that animal available.
Sure. And like I said, we look at things and we interpret it in certain ways, right? So I can look at the same fish and say, well, we have a creator who created that fish, right? And we can argue back and forth as to how our theories can be proven, or our hypothesis, or predictions, or what have you. But we can look at the same evidence, and you see that happen all the time in real life, right? You have people arguing what the amendments mean, what the Constitution means. And
True, but those right there are inherently subjective as to how they're structured, because it's a linguistic type thing. So while I understand the analogy being made, I would disagree in its real efficacy for it. So that's getting into the realm of subjectivity, extreme subjectivity. What do we mean by these precise words in this particular order? Whereas when it comes to evolution, when it comes to science, when it comes to, let's just stick on Tiktaalik for a moment, that's based on objectively observable data. And so it wasn't enough that we saw this organism. It was the fact that we found this organism in the geologic location that was predicted, but also the strata, the actual type of rock and layer of rock that it was found in, that was predicted. Because you don't, while it's potentially possible to get that right by accident, to have that happen multiple times over successive predictions, Tiktaalik is just one of several predictions that have been made by evolutionary theory as to where we would find certain organisms in the fossil record. And it has been consistently proven accurate. So at that point, it's not about looking at data and reaching different interpretations. It's that the theory that we've constructed made this prediction, and we went out and confirmed this prediction precisely how it was given to us by that scientific theory.
Well, let me give you, maybe I'll give you a better example that's more scientific than, since the first analogy was, I would agree, wasn't as good. So,
okay.
I'm sure you're aware that they found, I think this was in 2005, they found a dinosaur bone, and they were able to, see the tissues and.
You're talking about the Mary Schweitzer deal with the Tyrannosaurus Rex bone. So
let me just finish the point.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I do want to hear your response on it, but basically, the prediction that they would have made, right, is that that's not possible prior to finding that. I mean, I've read science sources that say that prior to that, we would have never guessed that was possible. And anything that's over 1 million years old shouldn't have tissues on it, that on the bones, right? So that's the prediction, and that there's a monkey wrench thrown. Now, obviously, there's a response from the evolutionist side to that, which I've read. But my point here is that, when you predict something and it doesn't seem to hold water based off reality, now again you have two people looking at the same evidence or the same thing and coming up with two different conclusions.
True, but the issue that you come across at that point is you have one group of people who are better trained on how to look at this evidence. Like, for instance, you would not go to an astrophysicist to ask a question about hermeneutics on the Book of Revelations, would you?
No.
So I would not go to Alvin Plantinga for a question that I should be asking Robert T. Bakker.
Sure.
And I specifically reference Robert T. Bakker because not only does he agree with evolution, not only is he one of the most prolific paleontologists of the 20th century and of the 21st century, he's also a Pentecostal preacher. So he's of the theistic camp, so to speak.
And so is Mary, I believe. She's a hardcore Christian. The one that
Yes, Mary
discovered it. Yeah,
Schweitzer, Dr.
yeah,
Mary Schweitzer. So she explained this in her paper as to
yeah,
why this tissue was pliable. It was a combination of the type of sediment in which the animal was buried in and consequently fossilized in, as well as the type of solution that was used to rinse any material off the bone. And it wasn't until that solution was applied that made this tissue, quote unquote, viable, because it was not tissue at that point. In fact, it was leftover bone marrow.
sure.
But
Sure.
it was not reinvigorated. It was just it reacted with the silicates that were in the sediment of where it was found,
Sure.
and it turned into a jelly-like substance for a brief period of time. And so that didn't do anything for the theistic camp. And in fact, Mary Schweitzer herself has come out several times telling people who have tried to shoehorn her discovery and say it is evidence against evolution and say, no, you're wrong. This is not what it was. I explained this.
Sure.
Stop it.
Now, and again, I was more so making an analogy of how previously, before looking at that bone, I don't think any scientist would have guessed that you could come up with what she did, right?
Well,
Pretty
no.
much
Well, that was more of an accident.
from the sources that I was reading prior to that happening,
Hmm.
prior to her discovering, if you go back before 2005, most would agree that anything over 1 million years old, you wouldn't be able to find such a thing. Now, she was able to do it, and it was genius on her part. Now, let me ask you this: has she been able to do the same thing with other dinosaur bones?
That were found in the same geologic area? Yes.
No, like just anywhere else besides that area.
No, none besides that area. And so that's what made it a unique geologic occurrence was the type of sediment. But not only that, it wasn't tissue. It was preserved bone marrow that was no longer bone marrow. It was fossilized tissue.
Sure.
And so the acid solution is what made it pliable. It was not pliable beforehand. And so it wasn't the issue that we're coming up to is that in fossilized remains over 1 million years old, you will not find soft tissue.
Sure.
It's not that you won't find fossilized soft tissue. It's just that you will not be able to find actual tissue there anymore. What's left behind is a fossilized impression of that tissue.
Right, but they wouldn't have predicted that they could even find fossilized tissue, from what I read, and I could be wrong, but any sources that I looked at before she discovered it, they all were saying over 1 million years old. Whether it's fossilized or not,
Hmm.
that's not a prediction that they would have made.
No, because it wasn't one that they were looking for at the time. And
No, but
so
that's still
it was,
insulting.
and so there was no prediction about what you would find in fossilized remains over 1 million years old. It was more that this was an observation that they made over a large category of things.
Yeah, yeah, that was a common belief that anything over 1 million years old, you shouldn't be able
Well,
to find things like that.
not so much a belief as it is not even really a scientific criteria. It was just an observation of
Sure.
this is common.
Yes, exactly, and
But
that's my
that
point.
doesn't but that doesn't make it accepted scientific knowledge because we had done no experimentation by which to isolate that as exactly being the case.
Sure.
It just
Yeah,
happened it was a happenstance observation that was useful for a time.
sure. Now let me ask you this, Thomas. And this is a completely different
Sure.
question. So where did the theory of evolution come from? And by the way, I saw William's comment there. I just wanted to throw
Oh,
this up
yeah, I
there.
did. I was going to give a shout out to that a little later on.
Yeah, yeah. And he did a great job. I don't know if you watched the debate.
I didn't get a chance to with prepping for this here.
Sure.
I will catch the replay of it later on because number one, it's Will. I mean, I know him and all that. And number two, it's
Yeah,
Dan Barker. Dan Barker is also usually pretty fun to listen to. He's not as dry as some people are in debates.
right.
So,
Yeah. So where did the theory of evolution come from, and who came up with it? If there was multiple people who were there.
There's several different people. Charles Darwin is one of the most notable.
Sure.
However, it actually dates back even prior to him with Carolus Linnaeus. He was a Catholic that sought to categorize and classify God's creation, and so that's where we get with what's referred to as Linnaean taxonomy, what we used for several centuries: kingdom, phylum, class, order, genus, species. And so that's where we got to where we are today for the most part. Now we more use what's referred to as cladistics.
Sure.
We have other proponents of evolution or scientific discoverers within it. They were called naturalists back in the day.
Yeah.
One of them is considered the father of modern genetics. This would be Gregor Mendel. He was a Catholic monk, and he discovered uh, dominant and recessive genes through his selective breeding of pea plants, if I remember correctly. Then you have Darwin with natural selection, which was mostly based off of the Galapagos Island stuff. Um, let's see. And then you get on into the 20th century. You get people like Dr. Kenneth Miller. He is a Roman Catholic who also testified on against intelligent design in open court in the Kitzmiller v. Dover trial back in 2005. Those are the ones that just kind of readily pop into my head. There are dozens more.
Sure.
Just again, I purposely don't necessarily prepare for these because I try to approach as much of this kind of from a lay perspective or
Sure.
just what I happen to know off the top of my head kind of thing.
Right.
Because, like I said, it's designed to be kind of a learning thing.
Sure. Now, correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
but from my reading, um, Darwin's grandfather was teaching evolution before Darwin was even born. Do you know if that's true, or have you heard anything about that?
I think he might have. I do not remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
I
I
would
think
have
his
to go back
name
and
was,
look.
yeah, I think his name was Ermas. I can't, I can't say it. Erasmus or
Erasmus?
Erasmus. There we go. Yeah,
Yeah, I think yes, I think so. He was also a naturalist. I remember that much.
yeah,
Um, and he may have done some stuff in regards with evolution, but I don't remember precisely what.
right. And so here's my other issue that I have, and the reason why I bring this up and this question up is, um, so he was a I think a 33rd degree Freemason, or he was pretty high up there. And
Mm,
so, and this is obviously we can look and see if these are
hmm
um, true or not, but this is what I've read, right? So that he was, and Darwin's uncle was also a Freemason, and I've heard that his father was as well. But I heard that Darwin himself was it. Charles Darwin himself was it. So I don't know if you're aware of the controversy between Catholicism and Freemasonry,
Um,
the battle between
I've heard some of the conspiracy theories with Freemasonry somehow tracing itself back to the Knights Templar and their wipeout back in the 1300s. But
yeah,
like
I'm more so talking,
that's pretty much the extent of things with me on that one. It wasn't really something that really made any um, impact on my life and doesn't really have anything to do with evolution.
well, so the reason why I bring that up, and this is more the issues that I have with evolution, right? So the fact that the Freemasons, and we can look at their writings and their minutes, the fact that they are writing things such as, we ourselves don't believe in the theory of evolution, but we promote it to the public and we push it to the public, to push our agenda of naturalism, that there is no God, and things of that sort. And those minutes are out there, people can read them. So that would be,
Then that
and I'm
must have
trying
been
to
someone
do,
else in conjunction with it. It would not have been Erasmus Darwin
no,
by
no,
what
not
I
him,
find
not him,
here.
not
Uh,
him. but what I'm just saying that, you know, if he was a Freemason,
He
um,
wasn't. He was a member of the Lunar Society and also the Derby Philosophical Society.
mhm. And what are those?
So the Derby Philosophical Society was basically an intellectual gentleman's club.
Sure.
Um, I don't know. I don't remember exactly how long it existed. It looks like it still exists today, but it's more just kind of a library type thing where people go to hang out. Founded in 1783, and actually Erasmus Darwin himself founded it, as well as the Lunar Society, which the Lunar Society in general was an intellectual driving force behind the Industrial Revolution in England, and especially Darwin himself uh, opposed the slave trade. In fact, he actually attacked it in his four most prolific publications: The Botanic Garden, Loves of Plants, The Economy of Vegetation, and Phytologia. And this society existed from 1765 until 1813. In fact, had several intellectual giants as far as the Industrial Revolution was concerned. You had James Watt. He improved the steam engine. Um, let's see. Joseph Priestley. He discovered a lot of substances and elements on the periodic table. He was an experimental chemist. And Samuel Galton. He was a Quaker gunmaker who had a taste for science and actually took Erasmus Darwin's place in the Lunar Society after Darwin left to bolster the expansion of the Derby Philosophical Society, of which his brother-in-law Samuel Fox was also a member.
Okay. Now, you know,
And these
I'm
were
not
all
sure.
very public and open societies. So,
Sure.
uh,
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm looking at other sources that say he was, like Freemasonry.network is one of them. Then he's
mm,
listed on there as one of them, and I think that's pretty credible. And they're listing scientists who were Freemasons, and he's on there. So I could be wrong, but from my sources that I'm looking at, you know, he seems to have been one. Um, I don't know what sources you have, but
based on the
regardless.
biographies that I've looked at here, he doesn't seem to have any ties to Freemasonry.
Okay. Um, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, we can agree to disagree there, but I
Hmm.
think Freemasonry.network is pretty credible as to who was and was not a Freemason. But who knows? I've never been on that website.
True, but at the same time, there's been organizations that used to have a plaque sitting on Abraham Lincoln's log cabin that he was born in and declared him to be a wonderful Democrat when he was in fact a Republican.
Okay.
So I'm gonna I'm just gonna stand on what I know from his biography.
Okay. You know, there's other ones here. Like there's a course that has 10,000 famous Freemasons for Mother Lodge, written by Haywood. This is an encyclopedia of Freemasonry, 1966, and that's page 1198. So, I mean, there's a lot of sources we can go to that suggest that he was one. Um, Again, moving on. I don't want to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Freemasonry in and of itself doesn't really have anything to do with evolution as I see it. And if they don't believe it and they choose to push it because of what they consider it to mean, that doesn't have anything to do with evolution as a whole. That has nothing to do with the science behind it.
So, if you know, I've mostly studied the roots of it more so than it of itself. Like you can probably take me to school on what evolution is and how to.
Yeah, because even as it stands, even if there was some kind of Freemason conspiracy in the 19th century, that has nothing to do with today. That
I
has
would
nothing to
argue that
do
it
with what
does.
we
I mean,
know to be true about
sure.
evolution and the science behind it today.
Sure. Well, if you layer on the different things that I'm talking about, like theological issues, you know,
Hmm.
philosophical issues, and then we have the roots of it being it to be pushed in order to break down religion, and push for atheism. Um, then when you layer those on one on top of each other, then it becomes a problem. Now, if you isolate those issues by themselves, I agree with you. But when I'm looking at these things and there's issues after issues with theory or whatever it is called today, then
No, it's a theory. I mean, there's
sure,
really nothing past theory.
okay, okay,
I mean, like gravity is a theory.
sure, right. Um, now let's move on to more scientific things.
Okay,
Right?
yes, and to get back to a question that you asked earlier about micro versus macro evolution.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so that is primarily something that has come out of the theistic camp as far as micro versus macro, and they
sure,
can't. And usually, when I ask people to draw a line of where micro stops and macro begins, most people can't do it.
right,
And the reason why is because there's no real definitive part for it. We still use those terms today here and there,
right.
but it's more to describe changes within species and then changes between species, which that's micro versus macro.
Sure. Um,
And so in reality, all evolution as a whole it is changes over time. That's what it is.
sure.
And you never outgrow your ancestry. That's another really big important part of evolution. It's called the law of monophyly. For instance, you something that has been really popular in some of the more fundamental Christian groups,
Sure.
like with Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron and whatnot. They keep bringing up the topic of the crocoduck. If they found that, that would be better evidence against evolution. That
Why?
would soundly
What is that, by the way?
refute evolution
What is the
because that
crocodile?
couldn't happen. What's
No,
that?
what is that thing? You said a crocodile?
Yes, a crocoduck. They
Oh, a
routinely will
crocodile.
go around with a picture of a duck with a crocodile's head.
Oh, that would be kind of cool.
That would be kind of cool. However, that would soundly refute evolution.
I wonder if I'd
So,
be scared of that thing. Sounds like it's half
yeah,
scary, half not.
right? Exactly. But here's why it couldn't happen. It's
Sure,
because crocodiles, and
right,
ducks are completely separate clades.
sure.
They never intermingled. Their clades never interacted with each other. So
Mhm.
if you somehow came up with a crocoduck, I'd be like, "Hey, you need to go collect your Nobel Prize. Take that animal to a zoo, some scientific testing facility, because we need to know how the hell that thing happened."
So they're saying that they found something like that, or
No, they're saying that that's something that evolution says, is that we should have had a crocoduck by now if evolution was true,
no?
and they
I guess,
just don't get it.
right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a expert on evolution. And I would think that that's ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't follow.
See, there you
You know.
go.
Yeah. Now,
They do it to try and make evolution sound absurd when it's not.
sure, sure. And sticking on to a more scientific topic, let me ask you this. Touch upon, if you could, on the fossil records, how the fossil record shows the evidence for evolution.
Um,
Or if it does or no. I don't know.
so early through evolutionary history of how, or history in which we had the theory of evolution operating in our scientific communities.
Sure.
So to kind of make that easier to digest, I'm just going to say evolutionary history, even
Right.
though that's not actually accurate. We're just going to go with that because it's easier to say.
Right.
And that is, we started with morphology as being a good common factor there, in how do things look the same at their structural levels. Because
Right.
we don't know what these things look like with skin on, with muscle tissue. We can only go based on what, in large part, their bone structure is.
Sure.
And so, by looking at the bone structure and looking at how that changes over time, we can determine, to some degree, relation. Nowadays, with genetics, we've gotten a lot better at it. And it turned out that morphology, for the most part, was right. There were some issues that morphology didn't quite answer, and so we kind of left that to the side. I'm trying to remember one off the top of my head, and it's honestly just not coming to me right now, so just going to move on for now. And if it pops back up, I'll bring it up again. And that is through genetics. Genetics is how we better understand and determine relationship between species at this point in time, or determine ancestry and this, that, and the other.
Sure. Now, are there any, I guess, holes in the genetic or fossil records that we can see that would be that would kind of be a monkey wrench kind of evolution?
No, there's no holes that would actually be a monkey wrench here and there, like a missing link type thing. In fact, when you get into the realm of talking about what people refer to as transitional species, that's not really a good thing to, it's not really a good way to discuss things, because in all honesty, everything is transitional. Like, for instance, there are more differences than there are similarities between you and your parents.
Sure.
And that's a single generation right there.
Right.
A single generation. There are more things that are different about you than you share, or than you share as a similarity with either of your parents.
Right.
Say what?
We're both still humans, or all three of us are still humans.
Right, you're both still human, but see, that's the thing, is it's at what point do we determine what is now the next species? And part of that is the ability to breed. For instance, we readily recognize that we are a different species from, say, a gorilla.
Sure.
We can't breed with a gorilla. I'm not sure if anyone's tried. I don't endorse it. Please don't. But anyways, we got to bring a little levity to this here and there.
Sure.
Can't be completely serious all the time.
Right.
But like, if you wanted to, you could try it either way. You could take human ova and gorilla spermatozoa, or vice versa, and you wouldn't get anything out of it. You would not get anything viable. Right. Because they're different species. Whereas dogs can interbreed for the most part. In fact, we've gotten to the point where we're not even really entirely certain as to whether or not dogs and wolves are really definitively a different species from each other.
Oh, really?
Yes, there's a massive size difference, that's for dadgum sure. Yeah. However, they are still capable in certain circumstances of interbreeding. That's how you get these like half German Shepherd, half wolf dogs, and things of that nature.
But yeah.
Right. Now, one good example would be dogs and bears. They're related. They share common ancestry. Like, we go back to the fossil record, we find dog bears and bear dogs.
Sure.
And I don't really fully understand how they draw the comparison, or how they draw the distinction between a bear dog and a dog bear. Yeah. But I will admit I haven't jumped as far down the rabbit hole on that as I have with some of the other things.
Sure.
So for me, that's more from just a lack of readily available knowledge versus it's just not there.
Okay. Thomas, let me ask you this.
Sure.
You're familiar with genetic drift, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any, do we have any evidence of genetic drift that we can observe today? Or is that a ridiculous question?
What do you mean?
Like, where we can observe like a species evolving to something different, I guess.
Okay, so genetic drift, all that is a change in allele frequency, and that's due to typically chance events.
Sure.
So that can happen at any time. In fact, we can observe genetic drift um, in animals. Like for instance, like spots versus no spots on frogs, or different colorations on
Sure.
other amphibians, things like that.
Sure.
I mean, so that is genetic drift. I
Right.
mean, there are lots of mechanisms when it comes to evolution.
Right. But see, that's not a drift that would take a long time, right? It's not one of those things.
Right, but that's the thing is genetic drift is genetic drift. Genetic drift is not governed by time. It's
Right.
just a change in allele frequency due to
Yeah.
a chance event. And usually that's due to some type of environmental shock, such as a
Yeah.
sudden change in climate, change in location, like a massive drought or something, or a massive flood, um, being transplanted in a large enough population from one area to another, like relocating endangered animals, things like that.
Right.
Um,
Like the music in the background.
sorry,
Um,
what was that?
I said I like the music in the background.
Yeah, my roommates over here doing a little bit of work and turned on a game and they thought they had the volume off and
No
yeah,
worries. No
hey,
worries.
it happens. It
Sure.
happens.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this, and this is maybe something that you don't get asked often or ever, but are there any holes in general to the theory of evolution?
Mm, what would you describe as a hole in what would you describe as a hole in a scientific theory?
That's a good question. Like something they observe and something, let's say they predicted, and that prediction didn't come about. Kind of like what you were talking about with that the little fish with the little fins that can maybe.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Um. I honestly don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. Could there be? Sure, but that's not necessarily a hole in the theory. What that is a failed prediction. And generally, what we found is there's either some outlying factor that we didn't account for in the initial prediction, either some environmental factor or some error in measurement of data here or there. That's usually where the problem comes in. Is if we have problems with a theory's prediction, it usually is some form of human error. But I do not know of any off the top of my head
No
for
worries.
evolution.
No worries. I guess that was my job to bring some forward, but that's not what I'm here
Well,
to
I mean, it's
do.
not necessarily designed to be a debate, but if you
Exactly.
had something, yes, I would like to know because that would give me a chance to kind of look at it, evaluate it, and see kind of what's going on there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this obviously is not a debate. I'm just trying to understand your position. I'm trying to understand
Oh yeah.
evolution. Um, and that's really the purpose of this.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is I was reading a little bit about evolution and this idea of natural selection, right? This idea
Mm-hmm.
of natural selection, that wasn't from Darwin. That was being taught hundreds of years before Darwin.
Right. Darwin just
Interestingly enough,
happened to quantify it and observe it
yeah,
in such a way as to better explain it. Like
right,
it was always kind of a working hypothesis,
right,
but it wasn't until Darwin's day, it wasn't until Darwin himself on his journey of the Beagle to where it really kind of solidified what natural selection was, what
right.
explanatory power it could offer, and where it kind of fit in the whole theory of evolution.
Yeah, what was interesting when I was digging that up is that a lot of these um, scientists or philosophers that believed in natural selection, they were Christians,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox. I don't think any of them were Orthodox, but Catholics and Protestants is what I found for the most part. Um, that was really interesting and that was surprising to me to find, and they had the same belief as a modern day Catholic or Protestant would have as far as theistic evolution, where these evolution of species, I guess, is something that God is kind of in play. He's the one who's causing that to happen, or working through these through creation to I mean, I don't know what the word is, but to advance the species to the human being. And that's where the theistic evolution would stop, right? They would stop at
They would arbitrarily stop at humans, yes.
humans, right? Yeah. So, and you would probably have an issue with that. I would assume.
Right. Well, and it's more because we can, by especially with modern genetics, looking at DNA in and of itself and how that answers a lot more questions going further on back into not just our evolutionary ancestry, but evolutionary ancestry of several other species. Well, really any other species at that point.
Yeah.
To draw the distinction at humans to the point of actually classifying a different genus entirely between humans and apes that they referred to as Pongo was entirely arbitrary, and it was done so to kind of preserve, at least to the best that I can determine, to preserve what they viewed as divine creation or divine creation of humanity.
Right. Right. Well, let me see here. I mean, let me see if I have any more questions. I mean, feel free to continue talking, but I don't know if I have anything else, but I would like to do a part two if you don't mind, because this
Oh
is fun.
no, I'm always down for multi-parting something like this. Absolutely.
We also got to
Because this is
do
not something that you can, these are, especially when it comes to evolution. Evolution is a very deep and nuanced topic.
yeah,
And so there's no way you can just learn it all in a half hour or an hour or so or anything like that. That's just not going to happen. Also, I'm going to say right now, we've got 5 people watching live right now. So, hey, thanks everybody for tuning in. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, please put them in the live chat. We will, at some point when it gets kind of towards when Elijah wants to wind down and everything, we'll start looking through comments and we'll pull those up and we'll address those, say hi, give any shout outs, all that fun stuff, and answer any questions that y'all have. So if there's a question that you think Elijah should have asked, or a question that you would like to ask yourself just because you want to know, drop it in the chat and we will do our best to answer it.
let me ask you. So let me ask you this, and I think you've touched a little bit about this.
Okay.
So to me, the way I look at evolution is, and you would blatantly disagree.
Depends.
So maybe not, right? So it seems to me that it's a philosophical presupposition, and this is the word that one of my favorite priests uses. His name is Father Chadwick Rooker. He has videos on evolution, you know, showing the roots of it and on Darwinism and things of that sort. So he would call it a philosophical presupposition, where, you know, it has an agenda that it's trying to push, from the roots of it, from where it was becoming more globalized and popular. It was pushing some sort of agenda to bolster atheism over theism, right? That's how I'm approaching it, and you know, maybe you can help me out with that.
I'm gonna say flatly at this point, no.
That's not my question. That's not my question. That's kind of like a premise to my question.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No. Go ahead.
So I'm sure there's evidence to it, but talk about the fossil links between the primate and the human. Like where's that connection? Where's the evidence where we can connect to see, like, okay, we have these primates and they evolved into where we are today. Does that make sense? Or
Okay, between humans and apes.
yeah, or
Okay.
apes and humans. But yeah, just kidding.
Yeah. So, let's see. Just kind of going based off what I have here. Also, right now, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to shout out something that Raw has been developing for the last several years, and that is the Phylogeny Explorer project, which is to create a database of all, basically to codify all the information that we have experimentally confirmed in this and everything with evolution, and make kind of an interactive tree of life.
Oh wow.
So you can
That's
actually
cool.
go between the different ones, and that would be a really awesome tool to have right now, which is what made me think of that.
Sure. No, no worries. I mean, we can do a part two. I mean, that's something you want to say for that.
Oh
I'm
no,
open.
nothing really in particular that has to be saved for that,
Sure.
so to speak. So I'm going to. Okay, so I'm going to do this right here. So this is mostly entirely off the cuff here. So,
Sure. This whole thing is off the cuff. That's what I love about it.
oh yeah, no, that's why I do these things the way I do them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a bit of a screen share here.
And you're going to be on Reason and Theology next Saturday, right?
Yes, I am actually. We're doing a knowing, uh, proving God by reason and revelation, if I remember correct, is the actual topic. All right, so this is what we're looking at right here.
Let me look at it on my computer here. I have the video open so I can see better here. Okay, let's see.
Okay, so I'm going to get out my dinky little photo editing tool where I can just kind of draw on here.
Sure, that's cool.
Yeah. So right here, let me pick a color. We're just going to use green since it's different from every other color on here. Okay, so here's where we are. That's Homo sapiens. And then in here we have several other ancestors in there, such as Homo neanderthalensis or Neanderthal man, Denisovan man, Homo habilis, and things like that, until we get back to what we largely consider the cradle of life in Africa, which is Homo erectus, the earliest humans that, for the most part. And this establishes what is genus Homo. Then we get into the Australopithecines, kind of in here. And then you have Hominoidea here. And then you have gorillas out here, over here, which is where we get to our modern gorillas, which your standard gorilla, their actual Linnaean classification is gorilla.
Okay.
For those who are not familiar with it, that's what we get to. And then this is Australopithecine. So this is Africanus. This is like Lucy and all that kind of stuff is right around in here. And then we get to chimpanzees should be right around this area here, I think. But yeah, I'm stopping the sharing on that one for now, just because it's not a great image. And so that's just kind of a quick and dirty of things.
Okay.
I can probably pull up a better one somewhere else, and so I'm gonna kind of look for that while we're talking.
Okay. So,
Okay.
so
No,
yeah.
I was incorrect. Chimpanzees fall into the pan family or panina,
Okay.
not to be confused with paninis, which are delicious sandwiches.
Very delicious. Yeah.
Okay, this one's actually a lot better. Rather, it's a lot simpler and thus will be easier to visualize.
Sure.
So I'm just going to use my little handy dandy screen snipping tool.
Handy dandy notebook. All right.
Yep, I guess that makes you blue.
Blue. You knew what I was referencing.
Oh, absolutely. I have children.
There you go.
There we go. That's a save as, and we'll just make that screen cap number 17, just to make sure that nothing else gets in the way on that one. And we're going to open that up. Okay. That's going to work much better. Much, much better. So I do apologize for the wait, everybody.
No
But
worries.
I promise you this will make things easier to see. See? Much easier. Already. Right out of the gate. So, we have our all-encompassing clade, which describes everything within it, which is hominoidea, or hominoids, apes, all of that. Then we get to where our final our branching ancestry would be for hominidae. So that's great apes and hominids. Gibbons are kind of an offshoot over here. And then we get homininae. It's a lot of Latin terminology, so it's can be a bit redundant at times. And that's where we have what we now refer to as not really Pongo, but Pongi, and that's orangutans. Then you have gorillas, chimpanzees, and our ancestry kind of falls in line here. Typically in this area here, with Catarrhine monkeys is if we go a little bit further back than even this shows.
So,
but yeah, I'll leave this up for a minute or two. That way we can kind of discuss it.
Sure.
Oh gosh, I just really messed up. Hang on. There we go. Now everybody can see it a lot better. I had an overlay on still. That's my fault.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, we saw it anyway. And it
Yeah.
still makes sense. So, I guess my question, if we can look at the chimpanzees, I'll just use the layman terms and English terms. From chimpanzees to humans.
You don't ever get from chimpanzees to humans. That's why you have chimpanzees. Let me get that pulled up.
How do we get to humans is my question.
Through successive generations, gene mutation over a series of successive populations.
Okay. So
like that's another scientific misconception that a lot of people have, is that they believe that evolution happens to individuals. It doesn't. Evolution happens to populations. So it's not suddenly a thing turns into something else. It's not that suddenly some one day a fish decided to walk.
Sure, no, I understand that much.
Right.
But my question is, so what was? It's hard to.
What was the common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees? Oh, okay. That's because I completely misunderstood that question, and that's my fault. So I apologize.
No problem.
We have not conclusively found it yet. However, the most likely candidate right now is something called Greicopithecus.
Okay, talk about that. I've never heard of that.
Okay, so Greicopithecus was something that we found back in 1944, and it dates to about 7 million years ago, 7.2 or 7.4. The reason why it's called Greicopithecus is because it's actually of Pithecine lineage, and I believe its nickname was something Greco, El Greco, the Greco, something like that.
Okay.
And it's the oldest direct ancestor of humans that completely excludes the chimpanzee lineage. So as of right now, the last common ancestor of both humans and chimps.
Okay.
So right after that speciation event.
Okay. And how long have humans been on Earth?
Humans? Are you talking specifically Homo sapiens? Like modern human as we understand human today?
Yeah.
Okay. I think something like it's like 300,000 years.
300,000. Okay.
Okay. So I'm I'm actually going to look that one up real quick to be
No, I think
specific.
that's what it is, but just
Okay,
curious.
the oldest, as of 2017, the oldest known skeleton of an anatomically modern Homo sapiens dates to about 196,000 years ago, so about 200,000 years.
200,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
We
where
have
was Noah's flood in there? Just joking.
well, if you go based on the information that's in the text of the Bible,
Sure.
that would be somewhere around, what is it, 2450 BC or something like that. Which, I mean, if we go on the worldwide flood model, that doesn't work because physics.
Right.
Oh, hang on. I'm going to address this one real quick. Person named JK. So I'm going to assume they're just kidding with this comment here. They say no transitional fossils. That is incorrect. Every fossil is transitional. Theory only ever stated there was a common ancestor. That is also not correct. It didn't only ever state that. It stated specifically, if you're wanting to talk about the Darwinistic theory of evolution, is that change will occur over time, over successive generations, due to selections by nature, aka natural selection. Oh, Miss Amanda Mary pops in. So let's go ahead and bring hers up. Personally, I love these comments like this because they're good for a laugh, and it actually sometimes asks a really good question.
Hey, that's me in the picture.
Hey,
that's my wife.
You. As someone who puts his faith in evolution, we got some problems with that statement right there. So we're going to break that down a little bit. Is, as best as we can describe it, at least dictionarily defined, is belief without evidence. Evolution has lots of evidence. I have zero faith in evolution. I have no faith whatsoever. Asked, do I say that my great, etc. grandfather was an ape? Okay. Well, generally, genetics is usually determined matrilineally. So, through the mother's side. Right. So, yeah, if you go back far enough, sure. If you go back far enough, I have an ancestor that was an ape. We all do. You go back a little further than that, we all have ancestors that were monkeys. Because we get through here these different clades, like so we have a human or modern human, which is us, and then you have primate, which is us plus primates, and then you have us primates, and then the parent clade of that would be Catarrhini or Catarrhine, and so we're actually share common ancestry with Catarrhine monkeys, and Catarrhine monkeys are defined as old world monkeys. So monkeys that have the ability and tendency to walk upright are generally missing a tail and have a downward sloping nose. And so, yeah, no. Evolutionarily speaking, you go back far enough, yes. We have ancestors that were apes and monkeys, and that's not a bad thing.
So, you know, that was
not anything. It just is.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to get to is, since we do have that, you know, if we go back far enough, do we have any evidence for the links that are being made? Like, let's say I can go back to an ape, and then I go backwards from the ape to myself. Can we find fossil records that show this?
Yes, we have lots of, like, okay, so for instance, we have Greco-Pithecus, right? Who, as best as we can determine, is the last common ancestor between both modern humans and chimpanzees.
Sure.
So at that point, if that's the earliest human or the earliest Homo species that we can find, then we take another step back, and if we find, say, the common ancestor between gorillas and chimpanzees, that's also the common ancestor between us and gorillas. Because we already have that common ancestry with chimpanzees.
Sure. But how do we know that that wasn't just another creature?
What do you mean?
Like maybe it was just another creature I mean, we're presupposing that evolution is true by saying here's a link. But what if evolution isn't true and that's just another creature that lived and now is extinct?
Then we would have ways of determining that they are not linked.
How so? I mean,
Like for instance, there would not be. Uh, for instance, we know there. We can safely say, for the most part, there's no common ancestor, say, between us and a virus. Because number one, we don't necessarily classify viruses as being alive or being life in and of itself. So, okay, let's forget virus. We'll say bacteria.
yeah, virus is a very touchy subject.
Yeah, it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people, especially right now. So, between us and bacteria, big characteristic there would be genetic differences.
Okay.
But at that point, okay, there's more bacteria on you than there is you. Like, there are more microorganisms that live on your body. So when you break all that down, it's like trillions upon trillions of cells. And so when you get right down to it, you're about 1% you as you understand yourself to be on a scientific standpoint. So it really doesn't matter. But no, evolution has explanatory power. It makes predictions. And then we can evaluate those predictions based on experimentation. And we have methods of falsifying it. For instance, say we find this fossil. We're just going to call it fossil X because it's more of a thought experiment than anything. And we predict that fossil X is a common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees. And we go and we find fossil X. Okay, so we've made a prediction and we found that. So one way to falsify that would be to simply not find the fossil. It's not a great falsification, but it is a potential falsification.
Sure.
Or that we find some completely different fossil there that shouldn't be there. Like, for instance, if the thing that I think Matt Dillahunty asked for, and it's one that I've kind of adopted because it makes sense, because it would actually prove the theistic side of things being against evolution pretty close to true. And that would be is find me a fossilized rabbit below the KT boundary in the geologic column. Find me a bunny rabbit below the KT boundary. If you can do that, you are one step closer to proving evolution to be completely false.
Why is that?
Because we understand the evolutionary history of rabbits, and early mammals were not mammals as we know them to be today prior to the KT event. The KT event is the event in which the meteor struck Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs.
Sure.
So approximately 65 million years ago. You find a rabbit or a modern mammal fossilized that radiometrically dates to that time and matches that rock, then you've got yourself a solid starting point for shutting down evolutionary theory.
So that's all
because evolution would not allow for that. That's a potential falsification.
Okay. Makes sense. But wouldn't you just reevaluate the theory of evolution? Like you said, we would have to go back and look at what we thought we knew and we were wrong, and maybe it's something else.
Right, because science is a self-correcting system. So we find issues within a theory, or we find that something doesn't work, or we look for something better. Gravity is a fantastic example of this. For instance, okay, we have our earliest descriptions of gravity, at least to my knowledge, going back to Galileo. Dropping 2 lead balls off the Tower of Pisa from the same height, but they're different weights and they hit the ground at the same time. Okay, so this gave us the idea of constant acceleration regardless of mass.
Sure.
then fast forward a couple of hundred years, and we have Sir Isaac Newton and the whole Apple thing, and he develops Newtonian physics as we understand it, Newton's laws of motion. This works really well on a local level.
Right.
It doesn't so much work on a cosmological scale. So we needed something more robust than even that. So along comes, in the early 20th century, we have Albert Einstein, who comes up with his theories of general and special relativity. These work at every level, or did work at every level at the time that they were presented. And so they didn't replace Newtonian physics. What it did was it incorporated them. Like, for instance, natural selection is not the end-all, be-all of what evolution is. It is a part of it. And the overarching field of study at this point is called evolutionary developmental biology. So that encompasses all of those things. It encompasses cladistics, Linnaean classification, Darwin's theory of evolution by way of natural selection, modern genetics. All of those things, microbiology, are contained within the overarching science of evo-devo, or evolutionary developmental biology.
Sure.
But like I said, self-correcting system. So it either explains something until it can't anymore, and then we find the explanation for that thing. And if those two work together as well as they possibly can, or they work together, then they're two peas in a pod, so to speak.
Sure. Now going back to the question that I initially proposed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I did not realize I didn't answer it. So let's go. Let's go back to that.
I think you answered it. I mean, if you want to keep going, but that's not the question I'm talking about. I'm talking about one, like the first 5 minutes of the show when I was kind of throwing things at you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Finishing your thought. Go ahead if you want.
No. I'm good. You got another question? Let's go for it, man.
Yeah. So this is more, like I said, philosophical. Going back to philosophy, I don't know if this is something you've looked into, but how can, philosophically speaking, how can something give what it doesn't have? Does that make sense?
Okay, so give what it doesn't have. So what is it that you were asking it to give that evolution doesn't have?
Not so much evolution. So
Okay.
how does a species develop something where it uses that for natural for survival, I guess, natural selection, right? Like how like, for example,
well, actually, you kind of answered your question a little bit there. Natural selection, for instance, like with Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands,
right,
based on which island they were, based on what common flora was to that area, gave a natural pressure, which is actually a selective pressure. It's not random. It's actually selective. Gave a selective environmental pressure to that bird. And so over time, that bird's population shifted based on the type of seeds or type of food that it had available, either the larger, thicker, more robust and powerful beak for cracking open harder seed shells, or the thinner, more needle-like beaks by which to pluck seeds from small, soft fruits and things of that nature. They were still finches, but these were mutations based on natural selection. And the natural selection was not only the environment, but also sexual selection. Potential mates saw these particular birds with these different beaks, or these better suited beaks for their environment, as being healthier, being heavier, being larger, or better suited overall. And so they were considered better sexual partners for the purposes of procreation and yielding viable young that can survive. And so those genetics get passed on through successive generations.
Right.
So that's one part of it. Another one would be mutation.
Well, I can look at that and I can say, God created all these different species and he gave them intelligence in order to know, how to use what they have, Like I said, we're looking at the same evidence and we're coming up with different conclusions.
Right, we may be coming up with different conclusions, but here's the thing, and this is where religion and science so often differ, is what explanatory power does saying God gave this animal intelligence? What does that explain? What explanatory power does that offer? What predictions can we make based off of it? We really can't. But by looking at it at a deeper level of how is this happening? Because that's the biggest fundamental disconnect I see philosophically between science and religion, or the philosophical side of religion, so to speak, is that when you look at things like when we talk about proofs for God and stuff like that,
Right.
y'all start at the top saying that God did this, and then you work your way down.
Y'all
Science,
from the bottom, and now you're here.
science works from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it comes down to the different types of reasoning and how we employ those.
Sure.
Like, for instance, from a philosophical standpoint, theism focuses a lot on deductive reasoning and focusing on a priori knowledge, things that can be known with certainty. But the problem that we run into with a priori knowledge on a philosophical standpoint is that it doesn't actually offer genuine content about the world around us.
Sure.
A posteriori knowledge does that. However, a posteriori knowledge is gained typically through inductive reasoning. And that's where, and I'm kind of getting into the weeds philosophically on this, but I feel it's kind of important to kind of understand where this disconnect happens, because I think that helps fuel better conversations. If we understand the differences going in, we can figure out where those disconnects are and try to bridge those gaps. And this is a big disconnect with, say, presuppositionalism, because they argue that all inductive reasoning is fallacious when it's not. They call everything that uses inductive reasoning, oh, that's the fallacy of induction. To me, that illustrates they don't really understand philosophy that well, because the actual fallacy is, and I'm sure you know this, but for anybody who doesn't, the fallacy of faulty induction. It's when you draw a conclusion from an inductive argument based on faulty premises. But you can do the exact same thing with deductive reasoning. You can draw a faulty conclusion based on faulty premises. It happens.
Right.
And so the difference with a posteriori knowledge is that you can't know anything for certain, but it offers genuine content about the world around us. And so that's why I don't say that religion and science are incompatible whole cloth, just that whenever you try to put the two together, there is going to be a fundamental disconnect in understanding, at least starting out.
Right. So, again, going back to my original question.
Right, because I rabbit trailed on you. That's my fault. I have a tendency to do that.
No worries.
Please reiterate the question, because on my rabbit trail, I tend to forget the questions.
So,
again, that's my fault.
No worries. Let me remember here. Yeah. So, how can something give what it doesn't have? Going back to that question. So how would you answer that? I understand you kind of gave the example of the birds, but
right, natural selection is part of how that does. And the reason why is because it's not so much giving what it doesn't have, it's about being forced to it's about being forced to develop something it may not have had before, or forced to adapt.
So you're explaining the what, it's natural selection, but the how is my question.
The how would be through its genetic code. Its genetic code mutates and changes. In fact, our genetic code is always mutating and changing.
Sure, but it doesn't change into, and it doesn't develop anything that we didn't have before. And I understand it's millions and millions and millions and millions, but is that something observable? Have we ever?
We can observe redundancies in the human body, for one. Like, for instance, you can't really see it as well on my arm, but when you pull your thumb and your pinky together, you see this little ridge right here.
Yeah.
That's actually an evolutionary vestige. It's called the palmaris longinus. And what it is it's just a tendon that connects a bone to another bone. It serves no purpose. It doesn't do anything for you. In fact, the only thing it does for you is it actually increases your chances of developing carpal tunnel.
Well, that sucks.
However, when you look at chimpanzees who have the same thing, it actually helps in their grip because they have additional musculature in there. And so it actually gives them greater forearm strength. And that's also one of the reasons why, despite being shorter than humans, chimpanzees are typically to the tune of at least half again, sometimes even twice as strong as the average human.
It depends on the human, but yeah.
It depends. Well, that's why I say the average human.
Sure. No, I'm just joking. So again, I mean, when we're looking at, you're giving an example here, but it's still the same. It's like we have whatever you just mentioned here, but that
Okay, so I think that we would probably arrive at a better answer for this question if you were able to give me an example of what you think of something you think that an organism doesn't have that developed.
Okay,
we'll go with that.
Okay, so let's say we
because it looks like you're approaching the territory of what would be referred to as irreducible complexity.
I'm not sure what that is, but if you want to explain that, maybe.
It's an argument from an intelligent design creationist by the name of Michael Behe. He proposed, even going back to the Kissmiller v. Dover trial and past that, such as saying the human eye is irreducibly complex. We know that's not the case because we can trace the evolutionary history of it. Another example that he gave would be the bacterial flagellar motor, where it's basically this flagella that a certain bacteria has that allows it to propel through solution. And he says that if you take any one part of those things away, then it just simply can't function. It simply ceases to be. Right. This was, to my mind, best refuted by, in all honesty, Dr. Ken Miller. I reference him a lot because not only is he an evolutionary biologist, but he's also a Roman Catholic. I mean, so I'm not sure how he personally meshes his belief with the science, right, but he has found some way to do that, and he doesn't see any conflict there. So he would probably be someone you might want to reach out to ask that question to. Sure. That being said, I'd love to have him on the show. But hey. Anyways, he showed up in court one day, and to hold his tie down, to use as a tie clip, he had a mousetrap. What he did was he took the trigger mechanism and the bait holder off of it. He removed parts of the mousetrap because one of the examples that he gave was that a mousetrap is irreducibly complex. Miller brought that in and said, well, see, it doesn't make a good mousetrap at this point, but it does serve a different purpose. It makes a great tie clip. And then looking at the bacteria flagellar motor, they actually found an organism that had essentially the same structure, but missing a couple of pieces. And it was the viral mechanism that transmits the bubonic plague. So no, it didn't work for motility, it worked for something else. Sure. And so that's a big misconception, is that something is irreducibly complex. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything. Like, for instance, you wouldn't ask a fish to do woodworking for you.
Not normally.
No. I mean, how are they going to hold a chisel to to turn a piece of wood on a lathe? It's not a good thing. It's not going to work because they can't hold it. They don't have opposable thumbs, all sorts of things. But they can swim like the dickens.
Yep.
Far better than we can. We're not good at swimming. When you compare us to most other life out there, especially aquatic life, even aquatic mammals, we, by comparison, suck at swimming. But again, just because something doesn't serve the purpose you recognize it to serve at that point in time does not mean it is incapable of function in some other way.
Sure.
And so while our eyes are fairly complex, they're by no means the greatest eyes on Earth.
Right.
For instance, the mantis shrimp can see, I think, 12 or 13 other colors more than we can.
But how did their eyes develop better than ours?
But see, that's the thing. That's the thing. What about that is better? Just because it can perceive a greater aspect of the color spectrum doesn't mean it's a better eye.
What makes
it just means it can do that.
Right, but I mean, do they have better vision than us?
I don't know. I mean, we can't exactly administer a vision test to them, but they can see, if I remember correct, they can either see either in infrared or the ultraviolet spectrum, one of the two.
That's cool. But are there species that have better vision than others?
But the thing is,
like a hawk, right? He can see further.
Oh yeah, way better vision than us.
Sure. So how did their eye develop so well, and the humans are sitting here needing glasses?
By necessity. Sure, you can find a blind hawk somewhere. I mean, it's probably going to die if it's out in the wild because it can't feed itself.
Sure.
But
that's a different story, right? We're talking in general terms.
In general terms. So, okay, they develop better eyesight essentially by necessity for their hunting style because they fly high, swoop low, grab and go. Whereas we're better suited at this point for scrolling through DoorDash on our smartphones and ordering from somewhere like McDonald's. I know that's a joke. But no, their eyesight developed based on necessity. And we see the same thing in animals that are functional, that are blind, or you find animals in the deepest parts of the ocean that don't even have eyes to begin with because they're not necessary down there. There's no, like, the eyes are a light collecting organ.
Sure.
They have no need of that down there because there's no light for the organ to collect.
Right.
So they don't have eyesight. They don't have eyes. They don't need it. And so it's based on not just mutation alone, but also natural selection, environmental pressures.
Okay, let's kind of shift gears here and talk
Sure.
about reason and intelligence, right?
Okay.
Would you say that humans have that more than animals?
Well, see, that's kind of a weird question there, because we define intelligence based on how we experience it.
Okay.
That's not necessarily how another organism is going to experience intelligence or how that organism understands intelligence. So that's kind of a hinky topic there, in all honesty.
I mean, it's an important topic, and the reason why I bring that up is because you have our ancestors that you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we go from that to what we are. And
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that we can build smartphones, we can build computers, we can fly a plane, we can build planes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're more intelligent creatures than they are. They can't do these things. So how does reason develop? How does reason evolve into from that to where they are? Or I don't know how we can measure where they were.
So evolutionarily, we can determine that based on looking at now the evolution of consciousness and things like that. That's a real gray area when it comes to science. So anything that I offer at this point would just be purely my own speculation on the topic.
Sure.
So you won't hear me quoting anybody specifically. This is more kind of the way I see things. So if we look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, we get to a point where being able to reason our way out of a problem became more important than being able to either outrun it, outstrong it, or outfight it.
Right.
And so problem solving became more selected for based on the environment.
Right.
And we do see that actually as time goes on, even within our own history. You see that language starts to develop more and more and more and get more and more complex when a culture branches out and interacts with more peoples of different persuasions. In fact, that's one of the reasons. It's probably one of the reasons why the English language today has over 600 some odd thousand words in it, and that's more than the next 2 or 3 languages in word count combined.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Linguistics is a really interesting thing too. If you get really bored, just start looking into linguistics overall, and I guarantee you will be fascinated by it.
Oh, I'm very fascinated by that. I've always wondered how language develops and different languages develop. That's really interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, to me, the whole idea of consciousness and intelligence, it's I don't know if evolution can kind of grasp that because it's not something tangible, right? So you can't really look at it scientifically, or I don't know if you can, but to me that's those are holes in evolution that it doesn't answer all the questions, but that's a very important question going from one species of our ancestors to where we are, and where is that link? Not just the link as far as what we were talking about earlier, but intelligence wise.
Well, I mean, we can already. It's not. It's not as big a leap as some might think to say that reason, intellect, intelligence, things that, in particular, I'll go with intellect and intelligence.
Sure.
Because reason is a human development, I believe. So we'll look at intellect and intelligence.
Sure.
We know that the brain is tied to evolution. Otherwise, we would not see congenital neurological disorders. These are neurological problems that are present at birth that happen over successive generations. So if your parent has this, the chances are very high the child will have this, so on and so forth, for several different neurochemical issues. So we know that your genetics play a part in your neurochemistry, your neural development, all these things. So if that is the case, it is reasonable to, it becomes reasonable to assert that everything to do with the brain as time goes on has some sort of evolutionary explanation to it.
Sure.
Do we have it right now? No, I don't think we do. Could we someday? Sure.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
And I think that would be more likely to be found if I had to like quantize it some way.
Sure. And again,
before we move on, I would like to go ahead and answer. I'm just going to call this person Just Kidding from now on since it's JK. Do you make any distinction between adaptation and evolution? I'm going to take a stab and think that you mean adaptation. Adaptation is part of evolution. So yes, it is. Adaptation takes place within evolution. So just to answer that question for them real quick. That was a quick and easy one. That's why I decided to do that.
Right. Right. I really don't have any questions, but I would like to do a part 2, maybe where I can kind of give more of my, less of questions and more of my, I guess, input in all these things, because I kind of just wanted to kind of feel where you are in your, I call it belief, and I know you don't call it faith, but to me, from where I'm standing, evolution is a faith-based science, and it is a philosophical presupposition. I understand that you disagree with that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but that
that is one thing I can say with 100% certainty. I know this will piss off all the pre-suppers out there. But I can say with 100% certainty that I do disagree with that statement, yes.
Sure. No worries. So, I mean, if you want to promote your next show or talk about Reason and Theology next week.
Yes. So, Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that and kind of close things out. So while I'm giving the closing, everybody, please put some comments down below. Credible Catholic, the Big Book, Volume 2. Okay, that's something I'll have to look into. I don't know what that is. Is that something that you recognize,
No, I
Elijah?
don't know what that is. Do you make any Credible Catholic, the Big Book, Volume 2? Maybe it's a book.
I'm assuming it's a book, obviously. I don't know what that is. I've not actually heard of that, but hey, I'll look into it. Why not?
Okay.
Say what?
I found it online. It is a book. I think it's by Father Spitzer. He's a priest that's heavy on science, but I think he believes in evolution, but I could be mistaken. I don't know.
Okay, maybe something to look into.
Yeah.
Anyways, yes. So tomorrow, Sunday show happening at noon. Harry's coming back on for that one, and we're still hammering out the details on a couple of news stories that we're planning on addressing. So please tune in tomorrow, and you'll find out exactly what they are. Also, Elijah, of course, is a member of the Reason and Theology group, which I'm actually a part of as well. You can check both of us out on their Roundtable live show next Saturday on April 18th. What time is that happening again, Elijah? At noon?
I'm actually not going to be in that one. I think it's
Oh, I thought
usually
you
at
were.
noon. Yeah, I'm in the other one. So you and we're not going to be doing
Oh,
shows together there because you're going to
oh,
be
that's
doing
right.
yeah, but maybe one day. We did
Yeah.
one before, but yeah.
Yeah, we did one before when Deacon Swaden was in there and
Right.
all that.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much everything for right now. Oh, another discussion with the Theist coming up for sure on April 25th. Michael Lofton's coming back. We're going to be discussing morality within a few different Star Trek Next Generation episodes. That was actually his suggestion, so we're going to have some fun with that, I think. Um, and I think that about covers it. And after we close out the show, Elijah, I would like to keep you on for at least a few minutes longer,
Sure.
and we'll discuss potentially when we can do the next round of discussion on this, and also give everybody a sneak preview, so to speak. We're also going to be doing a Miracles Part 2 at some point once Elijah has some time to kind of collect some stuff together to bring to the show. So give everybody a sneak peek of that too. All right, so once again, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, hit the notification bell icon next to that subscribe button after it says you're subscribed. That'll let you know when shows are coming up, let you set reminders, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
You
Thomas,
can say
Try
what?
to just you know what you sound. You sound. I love the way you talk. You sound like one of those Universal Studio Tour people.
Okay. Yeah, I've been told I have a radio voice, and I
Yeah.
don't know how much of it's me and how much of it's the microphone, in all honesty, because I did upgrade the audio chain a little bit. But anyways, also, please remember to follow the Atheist Reformation on Facebook at facebook.com/the Atheist Reformation if I cannot get tongue-tied this evening. And finally, if you want to be on the show, if you're a theist and want to have a discussion with me on Discussions with a Theist, you can reach me at theatheistreformation@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment in this below this video or any video. I do monitor my email pretty much daily, and if I see that I have a comment notification, I do go and check those out, and I do try to interact with my audience there. Is there anything you'd like to plug for anything that you've got coming up with Reason and Theology, Elijah?
No. I mean, maybe I think we're gonna do a part 2 before I'm on Reason and Theology
Okay.
again. I think it's gonna be 3 weeks, I want to say, but anyway, we'll come up with a date and we'll go from there. But thank you for having me. It was a blast for me. It was fun. Learned a lot, and looking forward to doing more of these.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing your face on this show a lot more often. And hey, if you know of anybody who would be
Sure.
interested in coming on and doing a show, please let them know and have them get in contact with me.
Okay.
So I'm going to end the show here, guys. Elijah, you and I'll discuss a little bit more here in just a couple minutes. But until next time, thank everybody for tuning in. JK, thank you for saying nice show. Thanks. William, thanks for jumping in to give a shout out. Matthew, my little brother, thanks for jumping in. And Amanda Mary, also thank you for tuning in with a good question this evening. Look forward to seeing more of those in the future. Everybody, have a great evening.